They called me a temporary man in my own house, mocked my job, erased my name, but I still owned the mortgage, and I was done staying quiet. The smell of charcoal and fresh-cut grass filled the backyard as I adjusted the grill temperature. 42 years old today, and here I was, grilling burgers in the yard of a house that no longer had my name on the mailbox. Nearly a year since the divorce from Angela, but I still had a key. For Camille's sake. Angela had said, though I suspected it was more about having someone reliable to fix the garbage disposal when it jammed. I'd spent 13 years in this place. Built the deck with my own hands, installed every pipe and fixture with the skills my father had taught me. No fancy college degree on my wall, but I knew how to make things work. How to keep a home standing strong against the Sacramento heat and the winter storms. The neighborhood was quiet today, just like every other Saturday in our little slice of suburbia. Perfect rows of houses with perfect lawns, where my pickup truck with Barrett plumbing on the side stuck out like oil in water. I flipped the burgers, checked my watch again. Camille had texted earlier. "I'll handle the decorations, Dad." But it was nearly 5 p.m. and the only decorations were the balloons I'd hung myself at noon. Still, I kept hope alive. Every birthday since she was 5, Camille had made me a handmade card. Even through the teenage years when she barely spoke to me, that tradition had held. She was 18 now, headed to college in the fall, but surely some traditions would survive. The sound of car doors slamming made me look up. Not one car, but 3. Camille emerged from the middle one, wearing a black cocktail dress I'd never seen before. Behind her trailed 5 others, college-age kids in expensive clothes, sunglasses perched on carefully styled hair. They laughed at something, I couldn't hear their voices, carrying that confident cadence of people who've never worried about a bill. "Hey!" I called out with a wave and a smile. Camille glanced over her eyes, sliding past me like I was part of the landscape. One of her friends, a tall guy with carefully tousled hair, pointed in my direction. "Who's that?" "Plumber." Camille answered with a shrug. "Used to be married to my mom." The words hit harder than any wrench I'd ever dropped on my foot. Used to be not my dad, or even my stepdad. Just a former fixture like an old faucet that had been replaced. Before I could process this, Angela's BMW pulled into the driveway. She stepped out wearing oversized sunglasses and a Burberry coat I knew cost more than 3 months of my mortgage payments. Without a glance in my direction, she air-kissed each of Camille's friends, exclaiming how absolutely delightful it was to see them all. Someone turned on music, pulsing EDM that made the patio furniture vibrate. I stood by the grill, spatula in hand, suddenly aware of how out of place I was. This was supposed to be my birthday, in what used to be my backyard, but I might as well have been invisible. I served the burgers anyway because that's what I do. I finish what I start. The tall guy took a bite and nodded. "These are good." Camille shot him a look, then said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "He's great at grilling, great at fixing toilets too, but don't be fooled. Plumbing isn't exactly a noble profession." The group laughed, and Angela, glass of wine now in hand, raised it in my direction. "True. Some people are just meant to temporarily pass through your life." Temporary. After 13 years of marriage, after raising her daughter since kindergarten, after rebuilding this house's foundation, when it started to crack, I didn't argue. Didn't throw the spatula down in rage. Didn't make a scene like they clearly expected me to. Instead, I calmly turned off the grill, untied my apron, and walked inside. In the living room, Camille sat scrolling through her phone. Not looking up as I passed, I climbed the stairs to what used to be our bedroom, where I still kept a drawer of essentials for the times I stayed over to watch Camille when Angela traveled. I packed methodically my razor, the old flannel shirt Camille had given me for my birthday when she was 15, the small toolbox I kept for household repairs. On the dresser stood a framed photo from 3 years ago, Angela, Camille, and me at Lake Tahoe, all smiles against a backdrop of blue water. I realized then that I'd already been erased from their story long before I'd noticed. When I came downstairs, the music had grown louder. As I passed through the kitchen, I heard someone joke, "The old man's face is getting wrinkly. Probably going to crawl into a pipe and sleep." Nobody asked where I was going. Nobody noticed as I walked out the front door. But as I pulled it closed behind me, I heard Camille's laugh, followed by her voice, too clear even through the door. I thought he'd blow up or something. Guess we didn't need to hire an actor after all. I drove 3 blocks to the park, pulled into the empty lot, and sat there with the engine off. From the glove compartment, I removed a folder containing the mortgage documents for the house. My name was still on them as primary owner, with a note from my lawyer at the bottom. Neither party may sell without the primary owner's signature. Temporary, I whispered to the empty car. Let me show you what permanent really means. I knocked on Ramon Steele's door at exactly 10 p.m., my knuckles hesitating for just a second before making contact. The porch light cast long shadows across my face as I waited, the weight of the day pressing down on my shoulders like a concrete slab. Ramon had been my right-hand man back when we laid asphalt together in Stockton. The kind of friend who'd bail you out of jail at 3 a.m. without asking questions until you were safely home with coffee in hand. The door swung open and Ramon's bulky silhouette filled the frame. His eyes took in my duffel bag and the defeated slump of my posture without comment. He simply stepped aside, handed me an ice-cold Miller, and nodded toward the hallway where the guest room waited. Same pillow from 6 months ago, he said, his voice gruff but kind. Still got a dent in it shaped like your thick skull. The familiarity of it, all the smell of Ramon's house, a mix of sawdust and the chili he always made on Fridays, washed over me like a balm. I sank into his worn leather couch, the springs groaning under my weight, in a way that felt oddly comforting. On the television, some financial guru in an expensive suit was gesturing enthusiastically. Knowing your true value is the first step toward freedom. The man announced with practiced conviction, his teeth unnaturally white against his tanned skin. A bitter smile twisted my lips as I took a long pull from the beer. Value. What a concept. After 13 years of marriage, my value had been reduced to the plumber. After raising Camille since she was knee-high, I was nothing more than Mom's ex-husband. The cosmic joke of it all made my chest ache. You want to talk about it? Ramon asked, settling into his recliner with his own beer. I shook my head. Not tonight, maybe not ever. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. That's what I appreciated most about Ramon. He never needed the whole story to grasp the plot. Unlike my ex-wife, who demanded explanations for everything but never really listened to them. Sleep came easily that night, the bone-deep exhaustion of emotional amputation pulling me under. But morning arrived with all the gentleness of a sledgehammer. I was up before dawn brewing coffee strong enough to dissolve a spoon, skipping breakfast entirely. My stomach felt hollow, but not from hunger. Being torn from your family, even if they've already decided you're disposable, feels like undergoing surgery without anesthesia. Every nerve ending is alive and screaming, but you're expected to walk it off like it's just a scratch. By 7 a.m. I was calling Sarah Reeves a single mother whose water heater I'd fixed last winter when it gave out during a cold snap. She'd been grateful, then feeding me homemade cookies, while her 3 kids peppered me with questions about how water gets hot. Cole. Her voice carried surprise. Is everything okay? It's pretty early. Everything's fine? I lied smoothly. Just calling to see if that leak under your kitchen sink ever got fixed properly. Actually, no, she admitted. It's gotten worse, but I figured I'd wait until payday next week to call someone. I'll be there in an hour, I said, already reaching for my toolbox. Her apartment was exactly as I remembered it. Organized chaos. 3 kids orbited around the living room like planets around the sun, while laundry formed precarious towers on every available surface. The smallest one, Joey, remembered me and shadowed my every move as I worked under the sink, passing me tools with solemn importance. The job wasn't complicated, just a corroded section of pipe that needed replacing. I worked methodically, losing myself in the familiar movements. Plumbing makes sense in a way people never do. Water follows the path of least resistance. Pressure finds the weakest point. There are rules, constants, expectations that don't suddenly change because someone fancier came along. When I finished, I handed Sarah an invoice marked 30% below my standard rate. Her forehead creased with concern as she looked at the total. Are you sure about this? It seems way too low. I shrugged, packing away my tools. I don't price gouge emergencies. This wasn't exactly an emergency, she said, but reached for her wallet anyway. Single mom, 3 kids, leaking sink. Sounds like an emergency to me. As I drove back to Ramon's, memories invaded my mind like floodwater after a broken levee. Not to hurt me, though they did, but to clarify what I'd lost. I remembered the day Angela first brought Camille home to meet me. This tiny 5-year-old with frightened eyes and a pink backpack clutched to her chest like armor. She wouldn't speak to me for 3 days. Then on the 4th morning she'd appeared in the kitchen while I fixed a dripping faucet and silently handed me a wrench before I even asked for it. I wasn't her biological father, but I was the one who held her while she sobbed after being bullied in kindergarten. I was the one who sat through every dance recital, every science fair, every parent-teacher conference when Angela was too busy. I was the one who taught her to ride a bike, to change a tire, to stand up for herself. She used to call me her pipe-fixing superhero. Now she just called me the plumber, with eyes so cold they could freeze pipes in summer. Last year, I canceled a fishing trip I'd been planning for months to drive Camille to her college interviews. 12 hours round trip, waiting in sterile hallways while she charmed admissions counselors. Meanwhile, Angela was in Miami for a partner meeting that featured heavily on her Instagram as poolside cocktails and sunset yacht parties. By the time I pulled into Ramon's driveway, the memories had hardened my resolve. This wasn't just about being humiliated at my own birthday party. This was about reclaiming something I'd allowed to be taken from me piece by piece, year after year, my dignity. Inside, I opened my old laptop and logged into my banking accounts, 3 savings accounts I'd been quietly maintaining over the years. A modest investment in tech stocks that had performed surprisingly well, despite Angela's insistence that I didn't understand money. And finally, the property deed to a duplex in Cyprus that I'd purchased 3 years ago. The duplex had been my secret project, something I worked on weekends when Angela was networking and Camille was with friends. I'd told them I was helping Ramon with renovations, and neither had been interested enough to question it. I'd painted, rewired, and replumbed the place myself, planning to rent it out eventually. But now, looking at the property record on my screen, I made a decision that felt like the first free breath I'd taken in years. I was going there tonight. Not to hide, to reestablish. When I pulled up to the duplex just after sunset, it looked exactly as I'd left it 3 months ago. White stucco walls turned golden in the fading light, yards scattered with dried leaves from the oak tree out front, windows slightly dusty from disuse. It wasn't much to look at, but it was mine, completely mine. I unlocked the left unit, the one I'd been planning to rent out, and stepped inside. The emptiness greeted me like an old friend. The bare rooms waiting patiently for purpose. I set up a camping lantern on the kitchen counter, rolled out my sleeping bag on the hardwood floor. I'd refinished myself and sat down. For the first time in years, I felt completely unobserved. No Angela monitoring my expressions for signs of disagreement. No Camille watching me with increasingly critical eyes. Just me and the quiet house with its settling sounds and clean, empty spaces. While cleaning out the cabinet under the sink, some routine maintenance I'd been meaning to do, I found a cardboard box Angela had accidentally left behind when she'd helped me move some supplies last year. She'd been uncharacteristically helpful that day, eager to see this little project I'd been working on. Now I understood why inside the box were company documents signed under the name T-Voss, and among them an agreement Angela had signed with a Nevada LLC. My pulse quickened as I skimmed the pages, legal jargon jumping out at me like neon signs: joint venture, silent partner, non-disclosure agreement. This wasn't just business paperwork. This was something deliberately hidden. I pulled out my phone and texted Ramon, "Got some fun detective work for tonight. Bring beer and your reading glasses." I spread the papers out under the camping light, studying each page with growing intrigue. The company's structure was unnecessarily complicated, like plumbing designed to hide rather than facilitate flow. Multiple shell companies feeding into each other, addresses that led to post office boxes, signatures of people whose names didn't appear anywhere else in the documents. As I was examining a particularly interesting document, a wire transfer authorization with Angela's signature, next to this mysterious T-Voss, a sharp metallic scraping sound came from behind the kitchen wall. It wasn't the normal settling of an empty house. This was the distinct sound of metal against metal, like an old iron hinge being disturbed after years of stillness. I stood up slowly, grabbed the lantern, and moved toward the source of the noise. The kitchen wall looked normal at first glance, standard white paint over drywall, but as I ran my fingers along the surface, I felt a slight draft coming through what appeared to be a solid section. Closer inspection revealed a small rectangular piece of plywood painted to match the wall covering an opening that shouldn't have been there. I pried it loose carefully, setting it aside. Behind it sat a small wall safe, the kind you'd put jewelry or cash in. Certainly not something I'd installed during the renovation. Someone had cut into my wall and installed this without my knowledge in a property Angela shouldn't have had access to without me. "What else have you two been hiding from me?" I whispered to the silent room, the documents spread out behind me, and this mysterious safe before me, creating a perfect metaphor for my marriage, a facade concealing something far more complex and deceptive than I'd ever imagined. The name T-Voss scratched at my memory like a rusty nail through drywall. As I stared at the hidden safe in my wall, the pieces started connecting themselves. Trenton Voss. Of course, he'd first appeared at a charity gala 6 months ago, back when I was still living at home, when Angela and I were supposedly working on our marriage, the Children's Hospital fundraiser. One of those 500 a plate affairs, where wealthy people congratulate each other for donating what amounts to pocket change from their perspective. I remember Angela fidgeting with her phone all evening before he arrived. Then the way she straightened when he walked in like someone had replaced her spine with a steel rod. Trenton Voss with his spray-tanned skin and perfect teeth moving through the room like he owned the air inside it. He dressed like a magazine ad button-down shirt stretched tight across gym-sculpted shoulders. Italian leather shoes that probably cost more than all the tools in my truck hair slicked back with enough product to waterproof a roof. But it was the smile that got me practiced mechanical, the kind that direct sales CEOs flash in videos about unlocking your potential. Not the smile of someone who built anything real. By the time he reached our table, Camille was already starstruck. "He's a visionary," she'd whispered to me, though she'd never met him before. "He's opened 3 restaurants in the Bay Area already, all by himself." I nodded politely when introduced, automatically assessing him the way I assess houses, looking for the structural weaknesses hidden beneath fresh paint. When the conversation turned to business, I asked simple, direct questions. "What's your revenue model? How many employees? Are your locations turning steady profits yet?" Each time he'd sidestep with meaningless platitudes, "We're disrupting the traditional dining paradigm. Our growth metrics transcend conventional success indicators. We're creating experiential value, not just financial returns." I remember one exchange particularly clearly. After my 3rd attempt to understand what his business actually did, I asked plainly, "So are the revenues stabilizing yet?" He'd smiled that television preacher smile and said, "We don't measure in numbers, we create social impact." That's when the warning bells started clanging in my head. 25 years in plumbing teaches you that people who can't explain what they do in concrete terms are usually hiding broken pipes behind their drywall. I called Ramon the next morning after finding the safe, and within an hour he pulled up in his truck with a 6-pack and a determined expression. The garage at his place became our war room. His Harley-Davidson parked on one side, a folding table with his old laptop on the other. Ramon had worked construction longer than I'd worked plumbing, and he had the same nose for fraud that he had for bad concrete. "Tell me everything," he said. Cracking open 2 beers, I laid it all out. The charming facade, the vague business talk, the way Angela transformed around him, and now these documents with his name and Nevada LLCs. Ramon didn't interrupt once, just nodded and occasionally tapped notes into his computer. When I finished, he turned his laptop toward me. "Vincent D'Angelo Voss," he said, pointing to a business registry search. "Goes by Trenton now, but that's his legal name." We dug deeper. Public records showed 2 restaurant companies previously registered under his name, both dissolved due to tax violations. Neither had filed income reports for 3 consecutive years. One company document caught my eye, an incorporation paper listing A. Ashton as a co-owner. Angela was in business with him before. I said, the betrayal cutting deeper than I expected. "That's not all," Ramon said, pulling up a Nevada business registry. "They're both connected to this shell company. No physical address, just a P.O. box, classic move for hiding assets or laundering money." We worked through the night following digital breadcrumbs. By dawn, I needed professional help. I called Dean Holloway, an old high school friend who'd become a tax attorney for a small firm. We'd stayed in touch over the years, playing poker once a month until Angela had deemed it a waste of networking opportunities. "This is serious stuff, Cole," Dean said after I explained the situation. "If what you're showing me is accurate, they could be looking at federal charges. I can pass this along to the California Tax Fraud Investigation Unit anonymously. They'll do the heavy lifting." Back home, I created an encrypted folder on my laptop titled Trenton's Illusion. Inside, I saved everything: Angela's signed contracts, records of unfiled tax returns, suspicious transaction photos Ramon had discovered, and even a clip someone had posted online of Trenton accepting an envelope from a ghost property manager. Someone who managed buildings that didn't seem to exist. Social media became my next hunting ground. Trenton's Instagram was a monument to success. Theater wine glasses on yacht decks. Motivational quotes overlaid on sunset backgrounds. Captions straight from a self-help seminar. Success isn't told, it's shown. Elevate or evaporate. Vision without action is a daydream. Action without vision is a nightmare. But his digital footprint was as fraudulent as his business dealings. He'd post a photo claiming to be in Los Angeles at some exclusive club, but Ramon had seen him that same evening at a Sacramento restaurant event. Another time he showcased a business meeting in San Francisco, when I knew for a fact he was in Angela's backyard. My former backyard, because Camille had mentioned it during a brief phone call. I used a screenshot tool to archive his entire posting history for the past 6 months. Evidence upon evidence. Not for revenge, but for truth. Meanwhile, Camille was falling deeper under his influence. She called me one evening about picking up some old textbooks she'd left at my place, and when I mentioned my concerns about Trenton, her voice turned to ice. "You're just jealous," she said. "You can't stand that mom's with someone successful because you never evolved past turning wrenches." That stung, but what hurt more was learning she'd dropped out of her mentoring program at school, the one she'd been passionate about for years, helping underclassmen prepare for college applications. "It's too old school," she explained dismissively, "not aligned with the new energy Trenton talks about." I didn't argue I'd learned that much over the years. When someone like Trenton has their hooks in deep confrontation, only strengthens their grip. People like him don't collapse from being yelled at. They collapse when exposed to daylight like mushrooms grown in darkness. Instead, I visited Mr. Langston Camille's former advisor, who ran the Social Responsibility and Personal Ethics Club at her school. He recognized me immediately, his gray beard shifting with his smile. "Cole Barrett," he said warmly. The man who sat through 3 consecutive presentations in the back row, just to cheer on his daughter's thesis defense. Hard to forget that kind of dedication. We talked over coffee in his classroom. After hours, I didn't ask him to take public action that would only push Camille further away. Instead, I simply shared what I'd discovered and asked if he might find a way to remind her that ethics aren't determined by who speaks the most eloquently about them. "I have a seminar next week on financial responsibility," he said thoughtfully. "I could invite some alumni." Camille always respected evidence over rhetoric. On my way home, I drove past the house I'd once called mine. The rose bushes I'd planted for our 5th anniversary had been ripped out, replaced with imported ornamental grass that would die in the Sacramento summer heat. Warm yellow light spilled from the windows, illuminating a new framed photo on the wall. Angela, Camille, and Trenton, all wearing white, posed like a wedding portrait. Not a trace of me remained visible. 13 years extracted like a bad tooth. The hole filled with something artificial. I glanced up at Camille's bedroom window. The purple LED lights I'd installed when she turned 16 were still there, but the curtains were drawn tight. I remembered installing those lights, Camille handing me screws and laughing when I pretended to be electrocuted. Now she looked through me like I was made of glass. That night, lying on my sleeping bag in the empty duplex, I checked Camille's Instagram one last time. She'd changed her handle to Camille VX, the V obviously standing for Voss. Her new bio read, "Daughter of a mogul and a queen." I scrolled down further to discover I was no longer in her followers list. When I tried to view her stories, "A user has blocked you" message appeared. Slowly I set down my phone and stared at the ceiling, feeling something harden inside me like concrete setting. "All right," I whispered to the empty room. "Let's see how long this mogul lasts under the steel toe of truth." The text message arrived on a Thursday evening, just as I was packing my tools after finishing a job at an office building downtown. A simple notification that somehow felt heavier than the wrench in my hand. "Don't come tonight. This is a private dinner, family only." The message from Camille sat on my phone screen like a slap. I read it once, twice, 3 times. Each word felt like a needle jabbing into the soft tissue of memory I still called family. For weeks I'd heard about this upcoming family dinner. Through casual mentions in our brief conversations, I'd assumed foolishly, perhaps, that I was included. But this time the pain crystallized into something harder. I slipped the USB drive containing all my evidence into my jacket pocket. Tonight would be different. Tonight I wouldn't swallow the hurt and walk away. I knew the restaurant they'd chosen, La Provence, one of those places with no prices on the women's menus, and waiters who spoke in hushed reverence about the chef's vision. A place where a plumber's salary covered maybe an appetizer and a glass of house wine. The kind of establishment Trenton would select to showcase his supposed sophistication. When I pulled into the parking lot, I spotted Angela's BMW and Trenton's leased Audi parked side by side near the entrance. I parked my truck between 2 luxury sedans, its work-worn profile standing out like a callus on a socialite's hand. Inside, I learned they'd reserved a private dining room. The hostess eyed my leather jacket and dusty work boots with barely concealed disdain. "I'm joining the Ashton party." I said, my voice steady. "Sir, I believe that's a private event," she started. "I'm expected." I lied with confidence. "Just running late." The private room was exactly what I'd imagined. Soft lighting, velvet chairs, expensive paintings creating the perfect backdrop for people pretending to be what they weren't. I slipped in quietly, 5 minutes after the appetizers had been served. The conversation halted mid-sentence. 6 faces turned toward me. Angela, Trenton, Camille, and 3 people I didn't recognize. Probably Trenton's business associates. Angela set down her wine glass deliberately. "What are you doing here?" Her voice could have frozen pipes in July. I didn't answer her. Instead, I walked directly to the large screen mounted on the wall, presumably for some presentation Trenton had planned. "Mind if I borrow the TV for a minute?" I didn't wait for permission. I pulled out my USB drive and plugged it into the port on the side of the screen. "Cole," Angela hissed, "this is completely inappropriate." "So, was lying to me for a year." I replied calmly, navigating through the files. "So, was teaching our daughter that my profession makes me disposable." The room fell silent as the first document appeared on screen. The dissolution papers for Trenton's first restaurant company, highlighting the tax violations in bold. I clicked through methodically the photos of him handing an envelope to a ghost property manager. The unfiled tax returns spanning 3 years video clips where he gave 3 contradicting stories about his previous employment to different audiences. The silence in the room was absolute. Camille's hand trembled slightly as she lowered her fork. Angela's face had drained of color, her carefully applied makeup now looking like paint on a mannequin. Trenton's jaw muscles worked beneath his skin, but he remained frozen in place. I stopped at a particularly damning document, the Nevada LLC agreement, with both their signatures. "This one's interesting," I said conversationally as though discussing the weather. "Establishing a shell company to hide assets is a federal offense when it's connected to tax evasion." That's when a woman at the far end of the table stood up. She'd been so quiet I hadn't paid her much attention. Mid-50s. Practical bob haircut. Sensible but expensive suit. "Mr. Voss," she said, producing a business card. "I'm Agent Elizabeth Hollis with the California Tax Investigation Unit. I'd like to invite you to cooperate with our investigation after dinner." The color drained from Trenton's face so quickly I thought he might faint. Without a word, he pushed back from the table and walked out, not a single word in his defense. Not one attempt to explain away what everyone had just seen. The great motivational speaker suddenly speechless. Angela's shock quickly metamorphosed into rage. She stood up her chair, scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "You've destroyed everything just because you couldn't walk away gracefully." She spat, her voice shaking. I met her gaze steadily. "I didn't destroy anything. I just removed the masks you've all been hiding behind." One of Trenton's associates mumbled an excuse and slipped out, followed quickly by the other. Agent Hollis nodded at me respectfully before following Trenton's exit path. Leaving just the three of us, what once had been a family, I turned to Camille. For the first time in months, her eyes weren't defensive or contemptuous. They were empty, like someone had pulled the plug on the person inside. Her makeup couldn't hide the shock transforming her features. "Is it all true?" she asked, her voice small, almost childlike. I didn't answer with words, I just nodded once, then turned to leave. I'd come to expose the truth, not to gloat over its impact. Some lessons have to be learned through the wreckage, not through lectures. As I walked out of La Provence, the cool evening air felt cleansing against my face. I didn't look back. Didn't need to see Angela's fury or Camille's disillusionment. The truth would do its own work now without my supervision. The next morning I met with Dean Holloway at his office. He'd already prepared the paperwork, a legal assertion of my property rights that would prevent Angela from selling or further mortgaging the house without my explicit consent. "This puts a freeze on any transactions," Dean explained as I signed. "She's been trying to take out a second mortgage, I'm guessing to help with Trenton's legal troubles." "Let her find another way," I said, signing my name with uncharacteristic flourish. "She called me temporary. Let's see how permanent this feels." Later that afternoon, an email arrived from Dean with a single sentence. "Federal investigation officially opened on Voss. This just got bigger than state tax issues." I felt no joy at the news. Just a quiet resolution. Justice doesn't always feel good. Sometimes it just feels necessary, like replacing a broken pipe before it floods the whole house. That evening, as I sat in my duplex with a beer and a sandwich, my phone lit up. The caller ID read, Camille Ashton. My finger hovered over the screen for 3 full rings. Part of me wanted to let it go to voicemail to give her a taste of the silence she'd shown me. But I'm not built that way. I've never been able to ignore a call for help, even when it's disguised as something else. I answered. "Hello?" I said into the phone, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions churning inside me. "Dad!" Camille's voice cracked on that single syllable. She sounded nothing like the cold, dismissive young woman who'd cut me out of her life. This voice belonged to a much younger Camille, uncertain, vulnerable. That call was just the beginning. 2 days later, the consequences of my revelation at La Provence started hitting like dominoes, falling in sequence. First came the IRS notice to Angela Dean, forwarded me a copy, a formal letter informing her that due to her position as co-owner in Trenton's dissolved company, she was personally liable for a substantial portion of unpaid taxes and penalties. The amount would be enough to wipe out her savings, and then some. Following Dean's advice, my lawyer filed paperwork to place a lien on the house, preventing Angela from taking out another mortgage or selling the property without my signature. She'd been planning to leverage the house to bail out Trenton, using the home I'd maintained for 13 years to save the man who'd helped destroy our family. Around noon, a text message from Angela lit up my phone. "You're a monster." I didn't respond with words. I simply took a screenshot and forwarded it to my lawyer as evidence of harassment. Let the record show who was calling whom names. That evening at 9:15, my phone rang again. Camille's name appeared on the screen for the second time in 3 days, more contact than I'd had with her in months. "Why did you do it?" she asked without preamble, her voice raw and hoarse as if she'd been crying or hadn't slept. I took my time answering, setting down the pipe cutter I'd been using to prepare materials for a job the next day. "Because you can't build a castle on sand and then blame the tide when it washes away," I said finally. "You've embarrassed everyone," she shot back, though her voice lacked conviction. "The whole family, we've lost face. Truth doesn't make anyone lose face," I replied quietly, "unless the face was fake to begin with." The line went silent for so long I thought she might have hung up. Then I heard a shaky inhale. "I'll call you later," she said, and disconnected. The next day, Ramon texted me a screenshot. Camille had deleted her Camille VX Instagram account. My quiet surveillance revealed more. She'd left the group chat with those college friends who'd called me a walking toilet repair. She'd canceled the college preparation photo shoot Angela had arranged with Trenton for social media content. I made no attempt to contact her. Some realizations need space to take root. She was waking up, and like anyone emerging from a deep sleep, needed time to adjust to the light. A week passed. I threw myself into work, taking on emergency calls that other plumbers avoided, building a reputation as the guy who showed up at midnight when your basement was flooding. The physical labor helped quiet my mind, kept me from obsessing over what was happening in the house I no longer called home. Then a simple text message appeared. "Can we talk? No one else, just us." I stared at Camille's message for a full 5 minutes before responding. "The old place, Maple and 3rd. Remember that diner?" The next afternoon, I pulled into the parking lot of Millie's Diner, a greasy spoon where I used to take Camille for Saturday breakfasts when Angela was at her self-improvement workshops. Through the window, I spotted her immediately huddled in our old corner booth wearing a gray hoodie pulled low over her face. No makeup. Her fingers fidgeting with the torn corner of a laminated menu. She looked up when the bell above the door announced my arrival. For a moment, we just looked at each other across the worn linoleum floor. Then I walked over and slid into the booth across from her. Chocolate chip pancakes, no syrup. I asked as if our last normal conversation had been yesterday instead of months ago. A ghost of a smile flitted across her face. "You remember, some things don't change." I said simply. The waitress came, took our orders, left. In the awkward silence that followed, Camille seemed to shrink further into her hoodie. "I thought you were the obstacle." She finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Now I see I was the one who was lost." She reached into her backpack and pulled out something I hadn't seen in years, a small wooden derby car we'd built together for a father-daughter race when she was 11. The paint was chipped, but my careful handiwork on the wheels was still evident. "I found this in a box in the garage," she said, setting it gently on the table between us. And it was like all these memories just burst open. Everything you taught me, everything we did together. Her eyes welled with tears. "I'm sorry, not just for believing the wrong person, but for forgetting who was always there." I didn't cry, though. Something tight and painful in my chest finally began to loosen. I placed my hand palm up on the table. "We don't need to go back to how things were," I said. "We can start something new." After breakfast, I drove back to the Cypress duplex with a lighter heart than I'd had in months. That weekend I made a decision. I registered my business properly, no longer as Barrett Plumbing, but as Barrett Mechanical Honest Work, real results. The following Tuesday, Camille called again. "My friend's brother needs help," she said without preamble. "His name is Ty. He's 19, unemployed, got suckered into a pyramid scheme last year. He needs someone to teach him something real." I agreed to meet him. Ty turned out to be a skinny kid with quick eyes and quicker hands. I offered him an apprenticeship on the spot. "We don't just fix pipes," I told him on his first day, handing him a wrench. "We fix trust, too." Word spread quickly through Sacramento's working-class neighborhoods. Cole Barrett's teaching trade skills to directionless young people. The rumors said, for free. Ramon helped me design a proper logo for Barrett Mechanical and painted it on the side of my truck. The first time I pulled up to a job site with that new logo gleaming in the sun, I felt a pride I hadn't experienced in years. A month after our diner reunion, Camille posted a photo of my truck with its new logo on her reinstated social media account. She didn't tag me or write a long emotional caption, just 8 simple words. "This name once forgotten, now remembered always." It was enough. On a crisp autumn morning, I checked my mailbox at the duplex and found something unusual. An actual handwritten letter among the bills and flyers. The return address made my hand freeze. Ivy Donnelly, Seattle, Washington, Ivy. My first wife's daughter from a previous marriage. The little girl I'd helped raise from age 3 to 8 before the divorce. I'd tried to stay in touch, but her mother had remarried and moved across the country. Our contact had dwindled to birthday cards and the occasional phone call over the years. I tore open the envelope with unsteady fingers. "Dear Cole." The letter began in neat handwriting. "I saw everything online about what happened with your ex-wife and that fraud. I'm not surprised you stood up for what's right. You're the only one who ever kept his promises to me." I stood motionless in the slanting afternoon sunlight, the letter trembling slightly in my hand, as a profound realization washed over me. I had never lost everything. After all, I reread Ivy's letter 3 times, before carefully folding it and placing it in my wallet. The connection to my past was like finding an unexpected support beam in a house you thought might collapse. Suddenly everything felt more solid. The following week brought news that confirmed what Dean had warned me about. The IRS had frozen all joint accounts associated with Angela, including our old savings account that she'd maintained access to after the divorce. Her financial lifeline had been severed with surgical precision. She's locked out of approximately $32,000, Dean informed me over coffee. They're investigating every transaction connected to Trenton's business dealings. As if on cue, my phone pinged with a news alert. Local restaurateur arrested on federal charges. The article featured Trenton's mugshot, his carefully maintained image now replaced by hollow eyes and disheveled hair. The charges read like a prosecutor's wish list: federal fraud, identity theft, money laundering through shell companies. His bail was set high enough to ensure he wouldn't be hosting any motivational dinners anytime soon. Angela's fall from social grace was equally swift. A neighbor who still kept in touch mentioned seeing her Lexus listed for sale online. The charity committee she'd chaired for years more for the photo opportunities than the actual charity work quietly removed her name from their website. The whispers at Sacramento's social gatherings transformed from admiration to schadenfreude. The queen of prestige exposed because she picked a fake mogul. I took no pleasure in her downfall. There's no satisfaction in watching someone you once loved become desperate, but I wouldn't step in to rescue her either. Some lessons need to be learned the hard way. I'd learned mine over 13 years of slowly being erased. Camille, however, was rebuilding herself with a determination that made my chest swell with pride. She started volunteering at a food distribution center downtown, showing up 3 days a week, wearing a simple t-shirt with "Built Not Bought" printed across the front, a subtle rejection of everything Trenton had stood for. Every Thursday afternoon, I'd pick her up from the bus stop near the center. I always arrived 15 minutes early, parked my truck where she could see it, and waited patiently. No rushing, no pressure. Just presence. "You know what I realized," she said one day as she climbed into the passenger seat, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. "Helping people doesn't require a title or a fancy degree. It just requires being real." I nodded, letting her words settle between us like a bridge being rebuilt one plank at a time. At Barrett Mechanical, things were evolving beyond what I'd imagined. Ty had proven himself a natural with tools and customer service, earning a permanent position after just 2 months. Word spread, and soon I had a second apprentice, Carmen, a 22-year-old Mexican immigrant with quick intelligence and quicker hands. I taught them both what I'd learned over decades in the trade. Reading pipes is like reading character. I explained, showing them how to identify weaknesses in a plumbing system. The truth always reveals itself under pressure. When people hire us, I'd tell them while invoicing a grateful customer, they're not buying a service, they're buying peace of mind. Ramon stopped by the duplex one evening to help me install shelving in what had become a makeshift classroom area. He surveyed the plumbing diagrams on the wall, the neatly arranged tools, the 2 desks where Ty and Carmen took notes. "You're running a damn school in a bathroom, Cole." He laughed, handing me a level. I grinned back. "Whatever teaches something real. That's what I teach." The nomination for Sacramento's Exemplary Citizen Award caught me completely off guard. Apparently, several families had submitted my name, parents of young people I'd mentored, customers whose homes I'd fixed during emergencies, even Mr. Langston from Camille's school. My first instinct was to decline. "It's not about recognition," I told Camille over dinner. "I'm not doing any of this for applause." She reached across the table and gripped my wrist with surprising strength. "I need to stand beside you at that ceremony." She said, her eyes fierce. "I need to show everyone who you really are." How could I argue with that? The ceremony was held at City Hall, a modest affair with local business leaders and community members, filling rows of folding chairs. I sat uncomfortably in my one good suit, the same one I'd worn to Camille's high school graduation, while the mayor read through accomplishments that sounded far more impressive than I felt they were. When it came time for introductions, Camille surprised me by walking to the podium. She stood straight-backed in a simple blue dress, looking both younger and older than her 18 years. "This is my father, Cole Barrett." She began, her voice steady. "He doesn't just fix pipes, he repairs what others abandon, and he was never temporary. He was just patient enough to wait for me to grow up." The applause that followed felt surreal. When I walked up to accept the small crystal plaque, I didn't give a lengthy speech. I simply nodded my thanks, thinking privately, They wanted to erase me like a stain, but I was the foundation they were standing on. That evening, Camille and I celebrated at Millie's Diner, coming full circle to where our reconciliation had begun. She ordered chocolate chip pancakes again, a continuity that felt significant. "My treat this time," she said with a smile when the check came. "But I'm leaving the tip," I countered with a wink. Later that night, back at the duplex that had evolved from an empty shell to a home, I hung something special on the office wall, a drawing Camille had made when she was 8 years old, a round-faced father figure holding a wrench with the wobbly words, "My hero," written above it. She'd found it in one of her old boxes and given it to me the week before, both of us pretending we didn't notice the other getting emotional. As I stepped back to look at the childish artwork, my phone buzzed with a text from Ty. "Fixed Mrs. Dobson's leak." She's referring. 3 neighbors. The exclamation points made me smile. He was catching on to the most important lesson: reputation built on honest work spreads faster than any advertisement. The next morning I climbed into my truck as the sun was rising. The new logo gleamed on the door, Barrett Mechanical, in bold letters, with a slogan I'd finalized just the day before. Not just fixing pipes, fixing perspectives. As I drove toward the day's first job, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. The lines around my eyes had deepened over the past year, evidence of stress and heartache. But there was something else there too, a steadiness I hadn't seen in decades. The look of a man who had been called temporary, but had proven to be the most permanent thing in the lives he touched. I wasn't just Cole Barrett plumber anymore. I was Cole Barrett Foundation, Cole Barrett teacher, Cole Barrett father. And there was nothing temporary about that.